This is the Louie Tee Network. The journey is long, and nobody said it was going to be easy. But all we've got is us. All that believe is us. The Redskins Report.
Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sister. I am your man and resident Redskins fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Redskins Report. Want to do something a little different today. Redskins just completed their third preseason game of the season against the Baltimore Ravens. To me, their best showing thus far in the preseason, and what better time to have it than in the dress rehearsal for the regular season. I've given my analysis and my thoughts on the overall performance of the team on my site, on the Braves on the Warpath page. A thorough analysis of the game is there. If you just go to the page and check it out, you will find out how I feel and how I felt about all the things that transpired last night. But I'm not here to talk about the game from last night. I'm here to discuss the 53-man roster, or as I like to say, the race to 53. Redskins, just like all the other teams around the National Football League, going to have to trim their roster down this evening. So a lot of roster cuts will be made as they start to trim it down for that final preseason game, and then they'll have to get it down to 53 for the start of the regular season. So I've got a list of guys that I feel like are going to make this team. And as you know, with every NFL squad, there are about 40 to 45 guys that you know are going to make the team no matter what. As long as they're healthy, they're on the roster, and the Redskins are no different. And so I have a list of guys. I have a list of 57 players that I think are legitimate options to make this team. Of the 57, 40 of them are what I have deemed locks. 8 of them are players that I feel like are shoo-ins. That means they should make this team. I don't know how the coaches feel about them. I know how I feel about them and what they bring to the table as a Washington Redskin, and I think they should make this team. And I have 9 players that are on the proverbial bubble. They could make this team. They could be cut, outright cut, or they could be cut with the intentions of being brought back onto the practice squad if they're not picked up by another team. So there are a number of players on this list that I feel like are going to make this team as locks. I want to jump into that quickly. I don't want to keep you here longer than I need to. So without any further ado, let's jump into the race to 53. The roster as I see it through the eyes of me, your man, Louie Tee. The 53-man roster for the Roster Redskins is going to look something like this. We're going to start with the 40 players that I believe are locks. These guys, barring injury, are going to be on this roster. Center, Corey Lichtensteiger. You also have guard Sean Laval. You also have guard Spencer Long, guard tackle Brandon Sheriff, Tom Compton as a tackle tight end option, Morgan Moses as a tackle, Trent Williams, the newly paid Trent Williams, fresh off of his new contract. He will make this roster as well. So those are your locks along the offensive line. There are 7 of them to be exact. We'll come back to the offensive line as we go through the other categories. Look at the quarterback position. All 3 of the quarterbacks are going to make this team. Kirk Cousins, Robert Griffin III, and Colt McCoy. There's not a discussion there. All 3 of these guys will be on the 53-man roster. You go to the running back position. Alfred Morris, Matt Jones, Chris Thompson, all going to make this team. There are no doubts about that. There is another back. We'll come back later to the running back position and talk about him a little bit later on. The tight end position. Jordan Reed and Derek Carrier, the tight end we just acquired for a conditional 5th round selection from the San Francisco 49ers. He will be on this roster. We did not trade away a pick for him to not make this roster. We are lacking depth at that position. He is definitely going to be on this football team. We'll come back to the tight end position as well. You go to wide receiver. Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Ryan Grant, Andre Roberts, and Jamison Crowder, all locks to make this roster. That's 5 receivers. I really believe, and truly in my heart believe, this Redskins roster will consist of 6 receivers, so we'll come back to that position. You go to the defensive side of football, so just so you know, if you're keeping score at home, that's 20 offensive players that are locks to make this roster. You go on to the defensive side of football along with the specialists. Okay, so they're all lumped together. You start with the defensive line. You've got Jason Hatcher, Ricky John Francois. You've got Stephen Haya. And you've also got Chris Baker and Terrence Knighting as your defensive linemen that are going to make this roster. So that's 5 defensive linemen that are locks currently to make this roster. We will come back to that position a little bit later on down the line. We go to the linebackers. Ryan Kerrigan, the showstopper, will be on this roster. Trent Murphy will be on this roster. Preston Smith will be on this roster. PRJ, Perry Riley Jr. will be on this roster. Keenan Robinson, K-Rob, going to be on this roster, as well as Will Compton. Remember, he was the first man off the bench last year in the reserves at the inside linebacker position when PRJ went down for a little bit. He was the one who filled in for him, so expect Will Compton to be on this football team. That's what the locks consist of at the linebacker position. We will come back to that position. There are other players that will make this team from the linebacker positions. You go to the secondary now, and you start with the cornerback position. Chris Culliver, Bashad Breeland, Vitamin B. So Cully, Vitamin B, D Hall, D'Angelo Hall, David Amerson, all going to make this football team. 4 corners that are locks to make this team. We'll come back to the cornerback position because there's another player that I feel strongly about. He's going to be on this roster if you ask me. You go to the safety position. Duke Ihenacho, Nacho, man. Duke Ihenacho quickly becoming one of my favorite players on this defense, going to make this roster along with Deshaun Golson, another free agent acquisition in the offseason via trade. He's going to be on this roster. That's it for the safety position. That's a wide open position there. I feel very strongly about other safeties, but again, if you're talking locks, they're the only 2 with a roster spot with their name on it as we speak right now. So 2 safeties. We'll come back to the safety position. There's a lot of change that could take place at that position. That's one of the most fluid positions on this team right now. And then you've got your specialists. Punter Tress Way, place kicker Ty Forbath, and long snapper Nick Sundberg. All of those guys are absolute deadbolt locks to make this roster. All of them are top notch at their positions. Don't have anything to worry about there. So when you look at that side of the board, when you're talking defense and specialists, there's 20 locks there as well. So 20 on the offensive side, 20 on the defensive and specialist side. So it's a very even balance, good symmetry there. Now we're going to jump into what I like to call the shoo-ins. These are players that I feel very strongly about, and I feel like they ought to be on this roster when it's all said and done. You go back to the offensive line and go back to the offensive side of the football. Josh Laribis, somehow, some way, this guy continuously finds his way onto the roster. And I think this is another season, because of his versatility, the ability to play center and guard. I think he's going to remain on this roster for at least 1 more season because he has 1 year left on his contract. We look at another player on that side of the football that's the only player on the offensive side of football that is going to be a shoo-in. I don't think there's another player that you can feel that strongly about making this roster on the offensive side of the football. Now you go over to the defensive side of the football. And there are 7 shoe-ins. So there are a lot of players that I feel really good about making this team on the defensive side of football. You start with Kedrick Golson, okay? 10-year veteran, a constant and a fixture in our locker room. He's a team leader. Doesn't have as much of an impact on the field. He's a solid player, but doesn't move the needle one way or the other. But his presence in this locker room is vital, and he's a solid piece on the field as well. He's going to make this team. Expect Kedrick Golson to be one of the defensive linemen on this roster when it's all said and done. Frank Kierce, guy we haven't seen a lot of in preseason, has been dealing with an injury, and so he could be one of those guys that could be up in the air. If they're fiddling around with another guy they feel good about that's been performing and he's been injured, he could be on the bubble. I don't think Frank Kierce is on the bubble. We saw a lot of what he was able to do a season ago. I think the Redskins staff very enamored with this kid, as are most Redskins fans. I think Frank Kierce is pretty safe. I think he's the guy that's going to be a shoo-in to make this roster. Jackson Jeffcoat, as we move on to the linebackers, he's done a tremendous job in the preseason. Had a sack, strip, forced fumble against the Ravens, and an interception in that same game. Also had a sack, I want to say, earlier in the preseason against Cleveland. This is a kid that can get to the quarterback. He was on this roster at the end of the season last year, and he was getting pressure on the quarterback then. I like Jackson Jeffcoat a lot. I think this coaching staff likes Jackson Jeffcoat a lot, and I think this is a guy that, with the injury to Junior Galette, basically saw his ticket punched to make this roster. I like Jackson Jeffcoat, and I think he was going to make it regardless whether Junior Galette was on this roster or not. I thought this guy has had such a strong showing at the outside linebacker position and his ability to get to the quarterback. I think that he is all but assured himself of a roster spot with the Redskins in 2015. You go to another linebacker, and it's Martrell Spate, the rookie draft pick out of Arkansas. Here's a kid that's not ready to play and contribute on the defensive side of football, but is a huge special teams presence. Again, Redskins lacking options on special teams, need as many good bodies on special teams. He's one of those guys that cares about special teams, is going to give it all he has if you put him on the field. And so I think because of that, because he was drafted by Scott McLuhan, I think he's going to get every opportunity to make this team, and I think he will. I think he's a shoo-in to make this football team. You go to the cornerback position, and this is a guy that I made a Redskins early declaration on Twitter about 2 weeks ago, and I said that my man Justin Rogers, who was playing outstanding football, I think I made this tweet during the Detroit Lions game, if I'm not mistaken, maybe the second quarter of that game, as I'm watching and this guy's just making play after play after play. He's made special teams plays, he's made defensive plays, he's been all over the field, he can play outside, but more importantly, he's a viable slot option. I think he is best in the slot. I really like this kid a lot, and I think he's done nothing but solidified his spot on this team. He's played everywhere you can imagine, had a huge tackle to stop Asa Jackson from making it a 106-yard kickoff return right before the half. Instead, it was a 103-yard return down at the 3-yard line because Justin Rogers hustled, stopped him at the 3-yard line. Redskins end up making a goal line stand and stop the Ravens from getting any points. So huge play there. Justin Rogers, to me, is absolutely going to make this roster. He is a shoo-in for sure. You go to the safety position now, and I think there are 2 more shoo-ins there. You got Jerron Johnson, the safety we brought over in free agency from Seattle. I think his special teams presence alone is going to make him an option and a candidate to make this team. But also, I think he's depth at the safety position. Don't think he's going anywhere. Expect him to be on this roster. Along with Trenton Robinson, I've been very impressed. And remember, Trenton Robinson has been on this roster already. This is not his first rodeo. He knows this defense. He's been on this team, and even though it's a new defensive scheme with Joe Barry, he's very comfortable on this roster. He knows what the coaches are looking for from him. He helps on special teams. I think he's good depth at the safety position. He's always around the ball. Last year had an interception. I like Trent Robinson. He's been around the ball all preseason long. I expect this kid to make the roster once again. And those are your 7 shoo-ins on the defensive side of the football. So 8 total, 1 on offense. that being Josh Lareba's 7 on the defensive side of football. So that's a total of 8. So right there, I just told you that 48 players, I feel very strongly about making this roster. So now, race to 53, you got 5 roster spots left. You got 9 players that I think are battling for 5 roster spots. Here are your 9 bubble players. We'll go back to the offensive side of the football and talk about these bubble players on that side first. And to me, I look at a lot of the competition for the bubble spots, and I think they're on the offensive side of the football. You've got guard Ari Kwanjo, 4th round selection out of Alabama. You've got undrafted rookie free agent Tacoby Cofield out of Duke. He's a tackle. You also have tight end Jerron Ham is a guy that I think is a bubble player at tight end. Then you have 2 wide receivers in Rashad Ross and Evan Spencer battling for what I think is 1 roster spot at wide receiver as 2 more bubble players. You go to the defensive side of the football and you have 3 more bubble players. You've got Houston Bates, you've got Kyshawn Jarrett, and you've got Akeem Davis, the safety that made the team last year on the show undrafted. And so those are your bubble players. Let's talk about the 5 that I think are going to make the roster when it's all said and done. We start on the offensive side of football. Ari Kwanjo. You don't cut 4th round selections very often. I think this kid is someone that they have high hopes for. He needs a little bit more time to develop and get where they want him to be. He's not going anywhere. You can't risk putting him out on the street and expecting no one to pick him up. Expect Ari Kwanjo to be on this football team. Go ahead and put him in, pencil him in. Tacoby Cofield, very impressed with this kid in the preseason. I think Willie Smith played his way off of the roster with his performance against Detroit. And I think a guy like Tacoby Cofield is the one that's going to benefit the most from that happening to Willie Smith. I think Tacoby Cofield has played very well, and it would not shock me in the least if he is able to make himself the 10th and final offensive lineman on this roster. You look at tight end Jerron Ham, I think he makes this team by default. We have 2 tight ends right now that I feel are going to make this roster. I've already noted them in Jordan Reed and Derek Carrier. And so because of that, I know we're going with the whole Tom straight out of Compton experiment at tackle as well in certain sets, which is fine, but you still need to have depth at that position. I think Jerron Ham has shown the ability to at least catch the football. I think he's a little light in the pants as a blocker, but again, I think he'll provide them with a little bit of depth at the tight end position. I expect him to make this roster. This is the biggest battle to me. At wide receiver, Rashad Ross has played extremely well this offseason. I mean, you can make a case that he deserves to be on this team just off of what he's done on the offensive side. He also brings a little bit of an element of special teams prowess to the team, but I think wide receiver Evan Spencer, you spent a draft pick on this kid out of Ohio State. He's known for playing special teams. He's a tough, hard-nosed player, does whatever you ask him to do. And I think he's a developmental project at receiver. I think the Redskins aren't willing to give up on a guy that they spent a draft pick on that's also a special teams demon. I expect Evan Spencer to find his way onto the roster as the 6th and final wide receiver, just edging out Rashad Ross. Go to the defensive side of football, and I look at Houston Bates. I like Houston Bates. I think he's done a number of things well this offseason. I think he's put himself in a position to at least get a chance with other teams. I just don't see him making this team here in Washington. I don't think there's enough roster spots for him to find. I could be wrong because he's impressed the entire camp. He's gotten sacks. He's been on special teams. I just don't think there's a roster spot with his name on it. I think Houston Bates just misses out. But I think rookie Kyshawn Jarrett, however, will be the beneficiary of that final spot on the team. He was drafted by this team, much like Evan Spencer. You spend a pick on a kid, you want to see him develop. I think he's going to get an opportunity to come in and play special teams and give himself an opportunity to learn the safety position and hang around. Made a nice interception against the Ravens. That can only help his cause in trying to make this team. Akeem Davis, was a guy that made this team last year. And the reason why I think he still has an outside shot is because A, he was on the team last year, and B, this guy is a tremendous special teams player. We saw that all last season. The question is, he's been injured all season for the most part. Played in the first preseason game and even got an interception versus Cleveland. Haven't seen him since, been dealing with a hand injury. Don't know when he's going to come back, but he hasn't played in the last 2 preseason games. That could hurt him. That could be the difference between him making this team and somebody else taking his spot on the roster. So I don't really know where Akeem Davis sits within the coaching staff's mind, but I'll tell you this much. Kaishan Jarrett is making it tough on them to keep Akeem Davis because I don't see both of them making the roster. I think it's one or the other. I don't see both of them. Right now, I'm giving the edge to Kaishan Jarrett because he was a draft pick, because he's available right now. And he's a little bit more, he's a little bit less rough around the edges than Akeem Davis, who is a very raw prospect as a safety. We know what he brings. Both of these guys are good on special teams. So I think that cancels it out. If you're talking about which guy is more ready to step in as a safety, I think Kaishan Jarrett is the answer there, and I think that's why he gets the nod, in addition to being a draft pick of this team. So there you have it. You have 5 players on the bubble on the offensive side, or excuse me, 4 players on the bubble on the offensive side that's going to make it, and you got 1 on the defensive side that's going to make it for your total of 53 players. So I'm going to run over the 53-man roster one final time that I think is going to be, when it's all said and done, the Redskins 53-man roster for the 2015-16 NFL season. And here it is. Corey Lichtensteiger, Josh Laribus, Ari Kwanjo, Sean Laval, Spencer Long, Brandon Sheriff, Tom straight out of Compton, Morgan Moses, Trent Williams, Tacoby Cofield, Kirk Cousins, Robert Griffin III, Colt McCoy, Alfred Morris, Matt Jones, Chris Thompson. I think Trey Williams is just going to miss this team. I don't think this Redskins team is in any position to keep 4 running backs, especially when that 4th and final running back doesn't serve another purpose anywhere else. You see the Redskins have been putting Chris Thompson on kickoffs as well, and they even tried him at punts just to make sure that if need be, he can do those things because he's filling multiple voids on this team. The more you can do, the more likely it is you're going to hang around. Chris Thompson fills a number of voids for this team, whereas Trey Williams would strictly just be a running back. He doesn't really help you on special teams right now. I think that's going to be his pitfall and ultimately the reason why he doesn't make this roster. Redskins would love to put him on the practice squad, but I don't know if they'll be able to sneak him onto the practice squad or not. I like our chances. I don't think anybody else is going to be hounding our stuff. But he is one of those guys that I would love to see make this roster. I just don't think there's enough space for Trey Williams. Jordan Reed, Derek Carrier, Jerron Ham, Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, Brian Grant, Andre Roberts, Jamison Crowder, Evan Spencer rounding out the offensive side of things. 25 players on the offensive side of football. We move on to the defensive side of football. Kedrick Golston, Jason Hatcher, Ricky John Francois, Frank Kierce, Stephen Chris Baker, Big Swaggy, Terrence Knighting, Pot Roast, Showstopper, Ryan Kerrigan, Trent Murphy, Preston Smith, Jackson Jeffcoat, Perry Riley Jr., PRJ, K-Rob, Keenan Robinson, Will Compton, Martrell Spate, Chris Culliver, Cully, Rashad Breeland, Vitamin B, D'Angelo Hall, D Hall, David Amerson, Justin Rogers, Duke Iheanacho, Nacho Man. And of course, Deshaun Golson, Jerron Johnson, Trenton Robinson, Kaishan Jarrett, and of course, your 3 specialists, Tress Wade, Kai Forbath, and Nick Sundberg. So the split goes and the breakdown goes 25 offensive players, 25 defensive players, and 3 specialists. I don't think it's going to be that perfect of symmetry right there, okay? That is way, way too perfect. Something's going to go wrong. It's going to be some kind of off balance, 24 and 26 and 3, or 27, 23 and 3, or, you know, 20. I don't think it's going to be any more skewed than that, 27, 23 and 3. But I really like the way that I have it set up, and I really think that that's the way it could be set up when it's all said and done. Tacoby Cofield could be a guy that they leave off the roster and insert someone else like a Trey Williams or a Houston Bates or someone like that, or maybe even a Akeem Davis for special teams purposes. Who knows? All I know is this is what I think is going to occur, and I like the chances of the guys that I have mentioned making this roster. I am a Redskins fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Redskins spirit will never die. My Redskins spirit will never fold until we meet again. Hail to our beloved Redskins. I'll see you in a little while as the Redskins start trimming down the roster. I'll be back to talk about who actually made the roster, if there are any significant cuts. You'll see this face and we'll talk and discuss it. Until then, we'll see how this Robert Griffin III and Captain Kirk saga unfolds and who will be the week 1 starter. That will be the topic of discussion that will dominate the airwaves for the next 2 weeks. There's no one who will be talking about week 4 preseason game versus Jacksonville. That's strictly for the guys trying to make the roster. Everybody will now turn their attention to week 1 versus Miami. The discussion of choice will be who will be the starting quarterback. You know where I stand there? We'll see what happens. I said the Redskins have to make the right decisions. They took the first step by starting Kirk Cousins in the 3rd preseason game, which is what I said they needed to do. And Kirk did what I asked him to do, which was take advantage of the opportunity and hit the ground running. Now, it's all in the coach's hands. Ball's in their court. They have a tough decision to make. If they make the right one, we have a chance to have a season. If they make the wrong decision, we'll be having some of those State of the Union addresses quite early in the 2015 NFL season. I'll see you in a bit.
There's plenty more where that came from. While you're here, subscribe to the channel. If you want more Louie Tee, be sure to follow me on Twitter at @InTheLabRoom, or you can like the Facebook page at In the Lab Room. That's In the Lab Room on Facebook and at In the Lab Room on Twitter. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. The Redskins Report.